On a Sunday night in March, sitting on your couch with the television on mute, you open your brokerage app out of the same idle habit you've had for 6 years, expecting to see the number you always see, the one that moves a little, means very little, and gets closed again within 10 seconds. Instead, you sit there for a long moment, doing the math twice because the first time doesn't feel real. Your portfolio gained more this month than your entire paycheck did. Not close. Not almost. More. You don't say anything out loud. Your wife is sitting 3 feet away, half watching the same silent television, and you don't tell her. You close the app, set the phone face down on the couch cushion, and spend the next 11 months not telling anyone at all, because some part of you doesn't yet understand what you're supposed to do with information like this. You are 36, and you'd always assumed this exact moment would feel like arrival. You'd pictured it, actually, more than once, usually during long commutes or slow Tuesday meetings, the day the math finally tips, the day the years of automatic contributions and index funds and not touching anything during the scary months finally start pulling more weight than your actual job does. In every version you'd imagined, this moment came with relief. Instead, sitting on that couch, what you feel most clearly is something closer to vertigo, the specific disorientation of a floor moving slightly under a house you thought was already finished. The following Monday, you go to work the way you always do, and something about the office looks different, though nothing has actually changed. You sit through a 2-hour planning meeting about a project timeline that used to feel urgent and now feels, for reasons you can't fully explain to yourself, strangely optional. You catch yourself doing something you've never done before, quietly calculating how many hours of meetings like this one your portfolio just earned back over the weekend without you in the room at all. It isn't a satisfying thought. It's an unsettling one, because you've spent 14 years building an identity around being the guy who shows up, who grinds, who earns what he has through visible, countable effort, and that identity doesn't have a place to file information suggesting the effort might no longer be the thing actually building your life. 3 weeks pass like this, quietly, before the guilt arrives in a specific, ordinary moment you don't see coming. You're in the break room, and a coworker named Marcus is talking, half to you, half to the coffee machine, about a client deadline that's been keeping him up until 1 in the morning for the better part of a week, the kind of stress that shows up as a particular tightness around someone's eyes. You nod along, say the right things, tell him it'll be over soon. And the entire time, some cold, uninvited part of your brain is running a calculation you didn't ask it to run, that your portfolio, sitting untouched, doing nothing, not losing sleep over anything, earned more last month than Marcus will earn from this entire brutal project once it's finally done. You don't say any of this out loud. You just feel it, sour and specific, standing there with a coffee cup in your hand, and it stays with you the rest of the day in a way the original Sunday night discovery didn't. You finally tell your wife on a Thursday, almost by accident, mentioning the number while you're both doing dishes, in the same flat tone you'd use to mention a package arriving. She stops, dish towel still in her hand, and asks you a question you weren't prepared for. Not, "That's amazing," which is what you'd rehearsed a version of in your head over the preceding weeks in case this conversation ever happened. She asks quietly if that means you're going to quit. You don't have an answer ready. You realize, standing there with a wet plate between you, that you haven't actually let yourself think about that question at all, not once, in 11 months of knowing the math technically allowed it. The idea of quitting turns out to be far more complicated than the math suggests it should be. Some nights you lie awake running the numbers forward, watching your projected balance in your head, feeling something close to excitement. Other nights, the exact same numbers produce something closer to dread, a specific fear that if you actually stop showing up, if you let the job go, some invisible mechanism will notice and take the option away from you right when you've committed to it. You don't fully examine this fear for what it is. You just feel it, quietly, underneath every conversation about the future you and your wife start having more frequently now. 6 months later, the market gives you a concrete reason to feel the fear was justified all along. A downturn, sharp and fast, the kind that makes financial news anchors use words like correction in a tone that doesn't sound corrective at all. Your portfolio, the same one that quietly outearned your salary back in March, loses nearly a fifth of its value in 11 trading days. You don't sell anything. You know better than that, logically, from years of reading about exactly this scenario. But knowing better doesn't stop you from checking the app 4 and 5 times a day during that stretch, doesn't stop the specific, hollow feeling of watching a number you'd started quietly depending on shrink in real time while you sit at a desk doing a job you're no longer sure you actually need. This is the part nobody had warned you about. The freedom wasn't the finish line. The freedom came with its own entirely new category of fear. One that has nothing to do with not having enough and everything to do with the terror of losing an option you've only just started to believe you have. You call your old manager from your first job out of college that winter, a man named Douglas who retired 4 years earlier after a long, quiet career, mostly because you don't know who else to ask the question you actually need to ask. You expect him to tell you something practical, about asset allocation or withdrawal rates. Instead, over coffee, he tells you about the first year after he stopped working, which he describes, without much drama, as the hardest year of his adult life. Not because of money. The money, he says, was fine, better than fine. It was the absence of a reason to get up that nearly broke something in him that 40 years of hard mornings never had. He says nobody prepares you for the fact that a job isn't just a paycheck. It's a structure, an excuse, a place other people expect you, a reason your alarm means something. He says he spent months waking up at the same time out of habit with nowhere he actually had to be, and that the specific quiet of those mornings was worse, in its own way, than any stressful deadline he'd ever pulled an all-nighter for. This is the conversation that finally reorganizes what you thought this whole thing was supposed to mean. You'd spent years assuming the goal was to reach a number, and once reached, everything downstream would simply resolve itself, the way it does in the version of this story you'd rehearsed in your head during all those commutes. Nobody had told you that crossing the number was the beginning of an entirely separate project, one with nothing to do with math at all. Figuring out who you are when your worth is no longer being measured in hours, deadlines, or a coworker's exhausted eyes over a coffee machine. You don't quit your job that winter, or the following spring. You do something quieter instead, harder to notice from the outside. You start treating the job less like proof of your value and more like one part of a life you're allowed to actually design, on purpose, instead of defaulting into. You take on a project the following year that has nothing to do with income at all, mentoring 2 younger employees through exactly the kind of stress Marcus was carrying that day in the break room, not because it earns you anything, but because you finally understand that the thing you were actually chasing all those years was never really the number. It was permission to spend your time on something that mattered to you without needing to justify it financially first. A year to the week after that first Sunday on the couch, you check the app again, out of the same old habit, and see almost the identical number, a monthly gain larger than your paycheck, sitting there quietly on the screen. This time, you don't close the app right away. You sit with it for a moment, and then you turn to your wife, who's sitting exactly where she was sitting a year earlier, and you tell her, out loud, the way you probably should have the first time. She doesn't ask if you're going to quit. She asks what you want to do with the year ahead, which turns out to be a much better question than the one either of you had been asking all along. Here's what almost nobody tells you about the day your investments finally earn more than your job. It was never actually the finish line you spent years imagining it would be. It's the day one particular question, how do I make enough money, quietly gets answered, and gets replaced, without any warning, by a much harder one that no spreadsheet was ever going to solve for you. Not how much do you have. Who are you, once the number stops being the thing proving you're worth something at all? That question doesn't arrive with relief. It arrives disguised as a Sunday night notification, sitting quietly on a couch cushion, waiting for you to be ready to actually look at it.